elevation certificate series. And so this section is all about the flood map information. And as I mentioned yesterday, and I'll just briefly go over some of these slides again, because we might have some different people here who weren't here yesterday. So I am talking about the current elevation certificate form, and FEMA is set to release a new form, hopefully soon. They were projecting by the end of this month, but I still haven't seen it yet. So I will be doing a follow-up with everyone that's been participating in these classes to send you the new form when that comes out and give you an overview of the changes to it. And so it's actually expiring today, and we have this grace period between this expiration date and when they release the new form. So we're okay to use it, but we do need to keep checking back on their site to see, if it's been sent out, and I'm gonna, keep an eye out on that, like I said. So just this basic information that I'll cover again from yesterday. What is the certificate and how is it used? So it has to be signed and sealed by a licensed land surveyor or a professional engineer. We're not allowed to have architects do them in Kansas. They are used to support LOMA applications to show that natural ground is above the base flood elevation. So you can't just do that with the elevation certificate alone. It has to go through the LOMA process to legally come out of the floodplain. And so there have been misconceptions about that. And of course, probably the most important thing from our perspective is using them to determine compliance and that structures have been elevated properly. We have a 1 foot of freeboard rule here in Kansas. And so to determine that things are built in compliance, we need to verify that with this verified information. And so just FEMA.gov, if you just type in FEMA elevation certificate, it should take you to the web page, and then that's where the new form should show up once it's finally released. So I'm checking back periodically just to see if it's come out yet, and I'll be doing that probably daily until that form comes out. And so since risk grading 2.0 came out last year, it is now an optional document for flood insurance. It used to be a requirement to get a policy, and now homeowners can certify their own property information on the certificate. So it is optional to try to relieve the burden of requiring people to get elevation certificates for that. And so they're using the risk grading engine, and they have a first floor height tool that's used instead of the elevation certificate to determine the first floor height, which is the first floor that's above the adjacent grade. And so the way insurance is rated has changed completely, but floodplain management and our requirements for having an elevation certificate have not changed. So I just wanted to make that clear. And sometimes the first floor height doesn't work, the tool, so they have a process for making assumptions about what that height is based on the foundation type of a structure. And just so you have a little bit of familiarity with flood insurance as it has changed, and there's a little bit of disconnect between insurance and floodplain management at this point. Excuse me. Okay. So again, we're talking about section B, which is all about the flood map information. And so to find your flood map, we have the FEMA Flood Map Service Center. So you can just type in FEMA flood maps, or just Google for FEMA Flood Map Service Center, or any of those keywords should pretty simply bring you to this website. And so if you have digital maps, you can enter an address or a place specifically in that search bar, and it will pull up on the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is the FEMA geodatabase for the digital maps. If you still have paper maps, we are working towards getting everybody digital maps, but we haven't gotten to some parts of the western side of the state. And so you can look at our website and see where you are as far as mapping projects. But if you have a paper map, you'd go to search all products, and that will pull up all of the effective and historic products for your community. So yeah, it's easy to do it either way. It's not a bad thing to know how to do it both ways. It's just a little bit roundabout to do the search all products, but I will show you. Okay, so this is our office address that I've typed into the search bar to just pull it up to show you what it looks like. So this is the National Flood Hazard Layer. We're based out of Topeka, so we do have digital maps, and so this is how the formatting looks. So you search by address, be sure to add in the zip code. That can help with pinpointing the location. Some communities have multiple zip codes, so just narrowing it down might help you. And then from here, you can make a ferment, which is a like zoomed in version of your flood map so that you can look at your area of interest and have all of the flood map information there. And just having a map like this is most of what's needed for Section B or to review Section B of the elevation certificate. So you can see on the map, we have our effective date, the community number, community name, the boundaries, and you can see that we're adjacent to the floodplain, and you can see the floodway there and how the floodway and floodplain is mapped in this area. So if you just click on dynamic map, as I've highlighted in the middle of the screen, it will just generate a map for you of your area of interest. So that's our office building with the red pin, and it lets you know that we're in zone X. So we are just outside of the floodplain, but we do have some nearby floodplain. So it's kind of a miniature firm. And then we have the legend that has all of the cross-section information, the layers, the symbology, the date of creation when I made this map, of course, the scale, and all of that information. So again, most of what you need for Section B would be here on a ferment, and of course, this is the National Flood Hazard Layer version of it. So if you don't have the digital map and you go to search all products, this is where it'll take you. So you just put in Kansas for the state, put in your county, and then your community, and just hit search. And as I said, it will bring up all of your products and everything. And so if you're unincorporated, there is like a specific community title for the unincorporated county areas as well. So I've pulled it up for Topeka, so you can see here we have 158 effective products. At the time, pending products, and then the historic products might also be useful for you if you need to look at a previous map to determine if something is a pre or post firm structure, or if it was previously in the floodplain or something like that. So out of 158 effective products, we need to be able to pinpoint which product we're looking for. So you just open it up and you have the full list of products here. And so if you're looking for a specific map panel, again, when it's not digital, it's less easy than just using the address search bar. But the first product here is the map index. And so it has IND for index in the community, sorry, the product ID there. So you know that one's the index. And it's like a general location map, kind of like a highway map, and it shows you all of the panels so that you can pinpoint which panel you're looking for. So probably don't need to download all of them. I usually just use the view function and then just save things as needed. So this is the Lawrence index map. So it's a little bit older version, it's from 2010. But this is basically what they look like. You have the map layout of all the different panels, and then different larger landmarks to kind of help you get your bearings and then pinpoint what panel you might need. So we have the Kansas River here, some railroads, highways, the city limits. You can see the island annexation for the airport. So basically you can narrow things down if you know that someone was trying to build something close to the airport. You can see which panel you would need, and then you would just download it based on these larger landmarks. So all of the panels you can see start with 20045, and this is for Douglas County. So if you look where it says map number on the title block, kind of to the bottom right side, so it's 20045, and then C is for countywide, and then again, IND is for the index. So each community has its own 6-digit number, and then each county has its own number as well. And so that is going to be part of the section B. So we'll take a look at that. But basically, yeah, you can do this and find your appropriate panel. Once you have your panel, you can open it and zoom in, look around at things, and then if you want to create a ferment, the button's right there. You just click on that, and then you can zoom in into your area of interest and capture that. So first, they want you to select a page size. So you just decide on what that needs to be. And then just keep in mind that the page size should be the same, like print to actual size if you're going to print it out, to make sure that you're preserving your map scale. And then once you hit next, you just drag the green box to your area of interest. Then you'd hit next again. You would adjust the box for the scale and the north arrow and your title block. And then once you have all of that the way you want it, you just hit preview, and then you should be able to save it. So there you see the preview, and you can go back and make adjustments or download it. They have a PDF option. We use PDF at the state. They're easier to work with. And then this is helpful as you're reviewing permit applications. You probably want to keep this on file with those applications, and then make sure you're filing those away geographically, where you have all of your property files and you keep all of your permits there. It's just good to have a ferment with it. And that way you can also just quickly look at the effective floodplain at the time the permit was done, in case things happen later on. And so it's nice because you can come back to it. So there's the PDF or PNG file format that you can download. All right, and so this is what it looks like from the search all products format. So it's a little bit different than the National Flood Hazard Layer. So again, this is Topeka and it's a digital map. So it does look a little bit different if you have just drawn paper maps, but there's plenty of examples of that, and we'll take a look at one in a couple of slides. But again, most of what you need to review section B is here on the ferment and within the title block. And so in this format, we have an aerial photograph background, and then you have the blue lines and dots and the horizontal striping that represent the floodplain, and the cross-hatching is the floodway. So anything within the blue lines, those limits are the floodplain. The black is the shaded zone X, which is the 500-year floodplain, and then everything outside of that is outside of the floodplain, or the unshaded zone X. So here's what section B looks like as of now. Again, we are looking at the form that expires today, and then we're kind of in a grace period until the new form is released, but this is how it looks. It's not very long. So you have B1 through 12 here. In this particular screenshot, there's a few other things at the bottom of that. But yeah, lines 1 through 8 are things from the map. So the name and number are on the title block. And so I'll show you a closer look at the specific numbers that you're going to need. But that's all going to be in the title block. So Topeka's number is 205187. So again, it's a 6-digit number for every community. Again, Shawnee County has its own community number. And so towards the top of, or like towards the middle of the title block, you can see where it says panel 192 of 450. That's actually an abbreviation and not what you want on the elevation certificate. It needs to be the full map and panel number, which you can see again towards the bottom right, 20177C 0192, and then E is the suffix. So that would be for B4 and B5, that full number. It needs to be the full number. We often see the abbreviated number in those sections, and so that's something to look out for. So the NFIP community name and community number. So again, the community number is a 6-digit number. The county name and the state, those are usually correct. Don't see many problems with that. It's pretty straightforward. And then a lot of times we see the suffix missing. And so E should be in B5, and that represents the number of revisions or updates that the map has had. And then B6 is the firm index date. So we did just take a look at the index for Lawrence, and then I kind of showed you where it was listed for Topeka. Those might not be the same number as the effective date for the map panel. So if you look at the title block on this one, it's September 29th, 2011. And so the index date could be different from that. Sometimes they are updated separately, so just being aware that they are not always the same. And then B7 is where the firm effective date or the revision date goes. So that's the title block number. You'd have to go back and look at the index for that date. And then just making sure that those two things are correct. And then for B8, that's the flood zone. And so that's not in the title block or anything. We have to actually go into the flood map and look at where the structure is located in relationship to the floodplain. And if any part of the floodplain intersects with the structure, then it's considered to be in the floodplain. And so again, we're in Zone X for our office building, but pretty quickly that is like 8 out of 12 items that are down. So that's pretty easy to verify, again, just with the flood map. And so we will take a closer look at the base flood elevation. We'll talk a bit about the datums. And then for B12, it's going to be a no in Kansas all the time because we don't have coastal barrier resources systems here. But here's a closer look at the title block. So there is the community number right there in the middle. Again, that's your 6-digit number that needs to be on the elevation certificate. And then towards the bottom is the full map and panel number that needs to be in there as well. And then under that is the effective date. So just be aware of where to find those and be aware of the abbreviated panel numbers. So here's some common issues that we see in this section. For B1, having a name but no number. B4 is the abbreviated 3-digit panel number. Having the suffix in B4 and then leaving B5 blank. Incorrect index dates or panel dates because people assume they are the same date, even though there's been a revision. B8, so it needs to be from the flood map. Banks often have this third-party determination company that will call it in the floodplain if there's any floodplain anywhere on the property. And so that's an issue that we come across pretty often, but we actually need to go in and look at the flood map to verify that the zone is correct. And then we'll take a look at some base flood elevation stuff, but often we see a rounded off number in that section for B9, and it needs to be calculated in a detailed study area using the flood insurance study, but the firm panels for the riverine areas will often have rounded off numbers there that people will just take from the map and then put that for B9, and it's not correct. So it needs to be to 1/10 of a foot. And then we need to go in and verify that that's been done correctly. Don't assume that a surveyor or an engineer has done it correctly just because they send you something. We need to go and look and make sure that it's a number that makes sense. If you see a rounded number, you can assume that they didn't calculate it, so don't accept it if that's the case. So here's an example of where B6 and 7 are not the same date. So in this example, Americus and Lyon County, they had a levee project, and so the panel, the index was updated, and then the panels are still from 2008. So again, don't assume those dates are the same. We should compare them, and then that can also be found in the map notes on the firm or the firmet. And then flood zone. Again, we have to go in and verify that the zone is correct. So they are clearly labeled, especially on the digital maps. If we're looking at paper maps, we might need to measure where the structure is in relationship to the floodplain. And so we'll take a look at an example of a paper map for the base flood elevation. So I do have other examples recorded of us going through how to do this digitally, like in GIS and using the digital maps. I just like to keep both examples in different classes so that both of them can be seen. But if you want to see the other like digital methods, I can send you the recording for that. And so this is a property site in Butler County, and we'll actually take a look at the elevation certificate and look at the issues that came up with this. So again, for a riverine floodplain, we need to use the flood insurance study. If there's a detailed study, if there's a zone A in Kansas, we require that they calculate the base flood elevation, and we have different tools for helping people to do that. But yeah, if it's a detailed study area with base flood elevations, we have to use the flood insurance study. And that's the regulatory document for that, and so we'll take a look at it. But if you do have paper maps, it might be helpful to you to go to Google Maps and just make a map of the area to help you measure out exactly where that structure is in relationship to these older hand-looking drawn floodplain maps. So they're not going to have structures on there. They're going to have these larger landmarks like streets and railroads or other things that can help us determine distance on the paper map so that we can compare it to measures that we've done in Google to verify whether that structure is in the floodplain and just make sure that it was done correctly when we're working with these older maps. And so if you'll notice on this, I've tried to highlight the site, and then you can see on the Google map, it's between these two meanders in the stream. And so this is Dry Creek Road. And if you'll notice on the paper map that's kind of behind it, you can see the rounded off base flood elevation. So the site is in between cross sections M and L. And so at M, just above that, you have 1279 with the squiggly lines. And then underneath that, that's close to section L, it says 1277. And so again, those are rounded base flood elevations. They just kind of help you approximate what the base flood elevation is in these areas. They're not exact. The cross sections are exact, but we have to go look at the flood insurance study and look at the floodway data table to find the exact regulatory base flood elevation for the cross sections. And that's how we measure the base flood elevation and verify that that was done correctly. So I will go through how this worked with this particular elevation certificate. And again, watch out for rounded numbers. It means that they were not properly calculated. So this is an example that Steve, my previous supervisor, did. And again, I just want to keep these paper methods, older map examples in some of our classes. And sometime next year, towards the beginning, we'll be actually just doing a whole class on paper maps. So just watch out for that if you are still working with them. So in this example, Steve has marked out the property location. There's an X on the same area. And so again, we're comparing measurements from landmarks on our Google map to find the exact distance of where this structure is located in relationship to the floodplain. And then he's colored a string and kind of laid it across the stream channel because as we're doing this, the right way to do it is to measure along the stream channel and not in a straight line. And the meanders add some distance, so keep that in mind as well if this is how you're working with it. So Google has measure tools in there, and so we can measure from a landmark like the center of a road, and then measure that distance to pinpoint the exact location. Again, we have the electronic methods and more GIS-based measurements and base flood elevation calculations in other classes. So just let me know if you want to see that. And then you can measure these paper maps digitally in like PDF software as long as you are preserving the size of the map. Because again, your map scale, we want to avoid any distortions. And then if you need assistance with this, we can help. So just let us know if you need any help. And there might be a few discrepancies between what you measure and what the developer has measured, but it should be pretty close as long as you're doing it appropriately. You want to be able to show your work and then defend your method. So to do this, we have to measure from the upstream corner of the property to the upstream cross-section. And this is because the upstream base flood elevations are higher than the downstream. So you can see in this map, we go from 1279 to 1277, and we need to measure the highest base flood elevation that could impact this property. So sometimes you have a convergence of two streams and you might have to measure two base flood elevations and then take the higher one. And that's the one that's going to be used for compliance to make sure that it's actually built high enough. And then the elevation certificate instructions, again, on the current form, say to list all of the applicable base flood elevations. And then, so I'll show you where that is in the instructions in a little bit. Okay. So I think it's pretty obvious that our site is closer to cross-section M than it is to cross-section L. And so we should be closer to 1279 than to 1277. And again, we're measuring along the stream channel. We have had some people that will just measure in a straight line, but officially measure along the stream channel. And so once we have that distance from our paper map, again, just using the map scale and determining what that distance is, again, from the upstream corner of the structure to the upstream cross section, then we go to the flood profile for that stream in that community. And so I've just taken this screenshot from Lawrence just to kind of give you the overview of what the whole profile looks like if you haven't worked with one before. So you have the stream name, so make sure that you are looking at the correct stream. And then at the bottom, you have your cross sections, which again correlate to the cross sections that we see on the map. And then you have the legend for your flood frequencies. And so you can see them mapped out towards the center of the page. And then you can see other roads and things that might impact that. And then you have your stream bed towards the bottom. And so that we have the distance in feet above the confluence. So that is the distance that we're using to compare to the distance that we measured on the paper map. So I hope this is making sense, but here's the flood profile from the Dry Creek Road area. So you can see L and M here. So based on the distance that we measured on the paper map, we're going to measure the same amount of distance on the flood insurance study profile, flood profile. And then we're going to find that same distance from our structure to cross section M. And so in this case, it's about 6 of these tick marks between the 2 cross sections, and it turns out after measuring, our structure is about 1/3 of the way down. So it's about 2 tick marks or 2 of the smaller squares downstream from cross section M. So that's the location of our property, and we're going to mark that specific spot. So that's where it is. You can see it highlighted in pink. He's put the X where the structure is. That's the upstream corner of our structure. And so you just take the line straight up. You could use a ruler if you're doing this the traditional way. And then wherever that line intersects with the 100-year flood, and we looked at the legend on the other profile, wherever that intersection is, you just go across straight horizontally, and then that gives you the elevation in feet, and then that is your base flood elevation. So make sure that you're intersecting with the 100-year frequency and not one of the other frequencies. So again, just be mindful of the scales on these. They differ between different streams. So just take a look at that, and then however many elevation in feet, however many boxes each one is worth. So in this case, it's 1 foot for each square. So from 1270, we've gone up about 8 boxes, a little bit more than that. And so we're calling it 1278.2 because it's just barely above that line. If it was halfway through the box, we might call it 0.5, or we might round up a little bit. So there is some kind of, there's an element of judgment here. It's not completely precise, but it's accurate enough. Again, there's a little bit of variation, but you just want to be as precise as you can measuring these and checking the work. So whatever number you come up with should be comparable to what the developer comes up with. And you do have the authority to require them to go up to 0.5, which is fine with us as long as you are consistent. So you have the same requirements for everyone. That's where written administrative procedures can be helpful. And it might keep them a little bit safer during a flood and prevent them from experiencing flooding in their structure. So we want to go back and check our work. This is the floodway data table. So we're finding the correct flooding source and then looking at our 2 cross sections of interest, and then you go over to regulatory, the 1% annual chance flood, water surface elevation, and then that's the precise number for each of these cross sections. So again, the numbers on the firm are rounded. These ones are taken out to the 1/10 of a foot that we need. Sometimes conveniently a cross section will pass through the actual property, and then you could use that number if it passes through the structure. We've seen that multiple times, but we have 1277.4 for the downstream cross section, and then M is 1279.0. So go back here, check your work. Again, that's the official BFE for these specific points. And so you want to have a number that's in between that range. If you're outside of that range, something might be wrong. Go back and figure out where you've made a mistake. Just check your work a couple of times. I've done this before and had just been looking at the wrong profile or something like that. So just making sure your number makes sense and their number makes sense, and that it has actually been calculated. So this is the elevation certificate for that site on Dry Creek Road. And this is why it's important to use the flood insurance study. And then we want to compare lines B9 and then C2A with our results from the flood insurance study. And so I will be going over sections C, D, and E tomorrow at the same time. So if you want to come back to that, but you can see in B9, they put 1277. So that's the rounded downstream cross-section number that's on the firm. So they didn't use the flood insurance study, and they used the lower of the two base flood elevations. So when we compare that to C2A, it's 1278.1. So they are below the actual BFE that we calculated. And we have the 1 foot above rule, so it's actually 1.1 feet below the level of compliance, which is a problem. So the surveyor just looked at the firm, took the rounded number, and used the rounded downstream number. And so that's, way too low. And this is why we always use the upstream corner to the upstream cross section. That's going to be the higher number that we need to comply with. And so this is a violation. The structure had to go back and be elevated. You can see that this is an older elevation certificate on one of the previous versions, but these things still happen. If the lowest adjacent grade was high enough, and it might be hard for you to see on this, but it's actually 1274.5. So sometimes we can resolve a violation if the lowest adjacent grade is at or above the base flood elevation. They can get a LOMA, they could come out of the floodplain, and that is a valid way to deal with a violation. But this property doesn't qualify. And I would just like to say that a variance doesn't work either. I've been getting a lot of questions regarding variances and using them to solve violations, but that's not a valid way of doing it. So I just thought I would throw that in there. And then B10, we have to include what the source of the base flood elevation is. And so we do have a process for determining a base flood elevation for you in the zone A. That doesn't have the flood insurance study for that. So if that's used, then they can just write DWR. I've seen that on plenty of elevation certificates, or state Division of Water Resources developed DFIRM. So that should just be added in there. It can also be included in the comments section. So yeah, if this is used in support of a LOMA and there are problems, the reviewers will ask for additional information. Rejected LOMA applications have been used to flag violations. And so, again, it doesn't matter how long a property has been in violation. Once we find out about it, we have to get it corrected. And so on our floodplain viewer that I'll show you, we do have the cross sections that were used to make the zone A floodplain areas. And so we have that as best available data available to help surveyors or developers to calculate the BFE in these areas. And so this is the Kansas BFE portal. So this is where you can request the base flood elevation for the zone A where data is available. So you just create an account, and then you're able to use the map and draw a polygon of your building as best as you can, and then someone in our office will calculate it. It also provides a lowest adjacent grade from the LiDAR, and that is approximate, and you can get a LiDAR-based LOMA if it's at least 2 feet above the base flood elevation. So just being aware of that and these different tools that we have available. So this page can be used to verify where data is available. And then if you're not sure, you might want to double check with us just to make sure if it's not available. And then if you just want to click around the area of interest, it does have like LiDAR elevation available at that specific point. And so again, it's an approximate, but it can help you to get an approximation of what that elevation is and whether it's maybe a good candidate for a LOMA. And that might help a property owner decide if they want to spend the money on a survey, because we don't want them to waste time and resources if it's not going to be approved. And so this can kind of give them an idea about that. And so we send this out to property owners and floodplain administrators pretty regularly. We also have something similar to this, like our floodplain viewer, where you can find letters of map change on the map. That's helpful. We also have a whole mapping page where we have all of the mapping projects available, so you can see where the different counties and watersheds are at in getting new maps. So all of that's on our site. And then this is kind of like a flyer with the instructions on how to use the BFE portal to request a base flood elevation. So again, you're going to trace the boundary of the structure as accurately as you can, and then you'll hit save when it prompts you, and it asks you, why you're requesting, and then it says DWR will be in touch, and then you'll get a letter from our office with that information on it. So this is a sample letter of what it looks like, and it gives you all of this background information, has the map information, the approximate lowest adjacent grade, and the base flood elevation. So again, this is not an automated process. People in our office actually work through these requests, and so it's been checked a couple of times. Again, if there's an area of convergence where there's 2 or 3 flooding sources, all of them need to be calculated. And so, yeah, that's part of what we do here. And then this letter can be attached to a LOMA application or to permits, so that we have this documentation of where the base flood elevation came from, if this surface was used. So it also lists the datum, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about datums because it's important that all of the datums match up. So just being aware of that as well, and how that relates to section C with the other survey shots. Okay. And then this is just kind of a close-up of that, where it gives you the information about the base flood elevation and the LiDAR and how these couple of numbers can be used, basically. Yep, we do have this handout that has the instructions on it. And in areas that don't have the data available, you could potentially get in touch with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to request a base flood elevation. I haven't really had much experience working with people that have done this, but there is a fee associated with it. I think it's $350, or it could be reduced if there's already stuff that's calculated nearby. But yeah. This is an older handout that we have on how to do that. It has like our old property address on it and everything. But I was just kind of looking up where, if there was an updated version of that handout. I haven't found it, but I think it would be easy enough for you to get in contact with someone to ask about how this could be done. There's a floodplain management number there, so I just wanted to throw that out there. And then LiDAR on DASC. So this is the Data Access and Support Center. They have switched to this Kansas GeoPortal format, which is different from the way they had it before. It's just been updated. And so this is the LiDAR that's available from 2018. And so if you have questions about LiDAR, I'll refer you to our mapping team. So you might want to get in touch with them about it. Otherwise, I'll refer you to them. And then this is our floodplain viewer. So it's just our state version of the same digital maps that we looked at on the Map Service Center and the National Flood Hazard Layer. So they're just slightly different formats of the same information, but our site's pretty easy to use. We have lots of layers that can be used for additional information. So you can just scroll through here and look at all the different data that's available. You can draw and measure here as well. If you were gonna, double check a base flood elevation here. And then on the bottom left of the screen, you should be able to see the print function. And that's kind of our version of the ferment. So you can make, the miniature map here as well. And as I mentioned, we do have the approximate floodplain, the zone A areas with the cross sections that were used to make the maps themselves. And this is just additional information that we have to help with those calculations. And then there is a disclaimer at the bottom, showing that it's from KDA basically. Okay. And then this is the mapping status currently. Actually, well, this is from July, so we've made more progress since then. But we are, working to get new digital maps all across the state. So if you want to check out our website to look at your area and see where you are in the mapping process, we actually have a mapping meeting right after this class. And so you can take a look and see which counties are where. And then the elevation datum, so I mentioned this, so we have NAVD 88, which is the more recent datum, and then previously, up into the 90s and before 2005, we were still using NGVD 29. So depending on when your maps are from, you might have a different datum. And so we want to make sure that this is correct because it can be an apples to oranges comparison depending on where you are. In Emporia, it's like 4/10 of a foot, which is almost 5 inches in difference. And so like in the previous example of that elevation certificate on Dry Creek Road, if you have that rounded down number and you use the wrong datum, that could be an additional 5 inches off, and then you'd be 10 inches off. And so for section C, we want to make sure that the BFE datum and those survey shots in section C match up, because if you're in Western Kansas, it can be as much as 1.5 feet in difference between the datums. So definitely something to look out for there, especially if you have an older map. It might be an NGVD 29, so just take a look at that. And then again, V12 does not apply in Kansas. So, and then this is something else. This is at the top of each page where it says that the information from section A should be copied exactly and that it should match up. And this is helpful if your pages ever come apart, if it's a hard copy, to get them back together. It also prevents forgery because we've had some property owners that would take pages from different elevation certificate and then they try to change the dates, which is just crazy. But make sure that this is filled out. And again, it's not usually surveyors doing that, it's more like property owners. And then this is a resource, and I'm certain that this would need to be updated if there are certain changes on the form. So as a lot of our resources are not exactly updated with risk grading 2.0 and now a new elevation certificate form. So just something to watch out for. Again, I will send you guys a follow-up email as soon as I know more about that form. And then I just wanted to kind of show you this diagram of how first floor height is looked at depending on the foundation type. So 1A, 1B, and 3, it's the first floor of the building. 2A, 2B, and 4, which have basements, it's the first floor above the basements. 8 or 9, which are crawl spaces. It depends on if it's pre or post firm. The elevated floor for the diagram 5, and then it's either the elevated floor or the enclosure floor for diagram 6, again, depending on if it's pre or post firm. And then the same thing for 7. And I just kind of wanted to throw that out there if you want to learn more about this stuff as far as risk grading 2.0. This is from the flood insurance manual, so that's available online. Okay. And then we do have this handout on using the Kansas Society of Land Surveyors. It's just kind of a resource for property owners mostly. And they can get started by looking at a list of surveyors available by county. Sometimes people are farther away, especially as you go further west. And so they may have to pay for that drive and that extra time it might take for them to get out there. You want to make sure that they've had experience with doing elevation certificates before. We've had floodplain administrators make lists of the surveyors that they know have done training on how to do this, and then give them that list to encourage them to be trained. So just a couple of interesting items there. So just making sure that the property owners know how to be smart consumers with pricing and timing and scheduling. So if they're trying to foreclose in a couple of weeks, they should just understand that this isn't the type of thing that can be done in the same day. And then again, instructions, from what I've heard, and I'm not trying to talk specifically about the new form, just that there's going to be clarified and maybe expanded instructions to hopefully help people to avoid some of the common mistakes that we went over today. But if you're ever in doubt about something, the instructions can be very helpful. Like for item B9, as I said, it does say to list all of the appropriate base flood elevations in that box if there's more than one flood zone or something. So just having all of this extra information in there to help you navigate the form or review the form is another helpful resource. And so other than that, questions? And then if you need a certificate, as long as you've been here for at least 45 minutes, I can get that to you. I know some people have come in late, and that was something that happened yesterday, so I just wanted to clarify that. But if you want a certificate, just send me an email.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay, so if anyone has a question, you want to come off mute, you can do that now, or feel free to reach out to me later by email. I'm happy to help. Okay, so not seeing any questions. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and hope you're able to join us tomorrow for the last part.